So in this segment, we're going to be talking about an article by Roy Hattersley, an op-ed, saying Brexit is a flop and the voters know it, so why can't Labour call for a closer bond with Europe? I had to double take because this article was written on the 31st of July, and some of the stuff he says in this article are quite ridiculous. I'll be honest with you, it's written from a very England-centric view. I don't want to say British-centric because I don't want to drag the Scots and the Welsh and the Northern Irish into it. Very English-centric view, in my opinion. So he goes, Labour has been known to ignore the inconvenient truths of economic management. I think that's a dig at Jeremy Corbyn, I'll be honest with you. So Keir Starmer was right to assert in his speech to Liverpool Labour Party that the overwhelming priority of the government he leads will be sustained economic growth. I think it should be something like wealth redistribution, but that's a bit too socialisty for Keir. Without it, Labour would be able to finance few, if any, of its proposed reforms, which makes sense. You need economic growth to fund programmes. You also need a lot of redistribution, which isn't happening as well. Yet 3 weeks before the Liverpool speech, Starmer used an address to the Centre of European Reform to categorically reject the suggestion that a Labour government should attempt to renegotiate some form of customs union with the single market. So effectively, what Starmer's ruled out is us rejoining the single market, a customs union, or a lot of the things to do with alignment with the EU outside of agri-foods. A prospect of economic expansion so exciting that even the announcement that talks were being considered would stimulate a sudden surge in capital investment. I don't think that's true. I don't think if Keir Starmer talked about rejoining the single market, would it lead to a load of capital investment, because there's no guarantee Starmer would even win the next election. So this is a ridiculous statement, I think, in pink. Keir does not suggest that a new Labour government should or would end any of these residual bilateral agreements with Europe. I think at most we have the TCA, which does have a series of bilateral agreements in it. But the author says, I do not underestimate the importance of maintaining mutual recognition of veterinary qualifications. That's important for us because we need it in terms of trade, but also the fact that we also need vets in this country. We have a shortage. But as a stimulus to the economic growth, it hardly compares with access to the 450 million consumers in the world's largest single market, a prospect that he seems willing to abandon for the strange reason that you cannot win back the trust of those who have lost faith in politics if you're constantly focusing on arguments of the past, which I don't think is necessarily true. We're not focusing on arguments of the past. These are arguments of the current. The EU has a huge market, of developed and developing economies we can export to. But I think one of my issues with the article is that he kind of focused on the EU for kind of labour and in terms of labour as in workforce, and also in terms of consumers. But he doesn't talk about, I think, the more progressive sides of the EU when it comes to things like workers' rights, etc., and being part of a bloc that can do a lot of good in the world, potentially, which they could do a lot more of, I'll be honest, with regards to refugees. But the author goes on to say, in fact, inconsistency does far more damage to political reputations than the stubborn refusal to abandon long-held convictions. Labour pronounced Brexit wrong in principle one year and promised to make it work the next. I mean, this showing, Labour's Starmer's leadership, where he talked about, Brexit is wrong and he would restore freedom of movement, but now he's saying make Brexit work. And this is the big pivot he's done, in my opinion, which I know a lot of lefties are annoyed at him for kind of abandoning a lot of his principles, a lot of his policy ideas during the leadership campaign. I know people go back and forth on it, blah, 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 but in the end, he did abandon some of his key promises regarding Europe. It's hard to imagine how leaving the EU can be made to work for the majority of Labour voters who, at least the general election, wanted Britain to remain. And I think what Starmer's gamble is he's going to keep Labour voters, existing Labour voters, and win back the ones who switched to Tories or didn't vote last time out. That's his big gamble. Is not working for most convinced leavers, which is true. I think some Brexiteers are acknowledging that there are Brexit problems. Even Moggs had to admit he was wrong about certain things. He does deflect on why he was wrong, but he has to at least admit he was wrong, and that's a problem for them, Brexiteers, I mean. The author says, I admit there is a gaggle of Brexiteers so fixated on the idea of sovereignty, for sovereignty's sake, people like the Iceman Lord Frost, taking back control is an achievement in itself, which they are prepared to pay an economic price for. These are zealots. These are zealots at the end of the day. You'll never convince zealots, but you can convince other people, but never zealots. Most supporters of withdrawal believe that Britain alone and free would enjoy an economic boom. Now they know better. I mean, we're enjoying an economic bust, I'll be honest. According to the Organisation of Economic Cooperation and Development, the UK economy will stagnate next year. That's the OECD. We will stagnate next year. The economy will struggle massively over the next couple of years. The promise was that all the economic damage of leaving the EU would be more than rectified by the new trade deals that would follow our withdrawal. these three treaties have been signed or are in prospect. And I mean, I've read through this, right? And what he says in this bit isn't true, because I've looked at the date. This is why I had to double take on it. The agreement with Japan is virtually identical to the one we would have enjoyed in the EU. That's not true. The one that we signed up to with Japan is far worse when it comes to state aid rules and other things, because again, we're not economically as strong as the EU. We won't get as good terms. Certain bits were renegotiated with Japan. Canada is facing the same kind of stuff. When he mentions the three treaties, I mean, we had a ton of rollover deals. Some of them had to be changed because they adhere to EU standards. I think the one with Ukraine was one of them. Brexit is a flop. The voters know it. The opinion polls show increasing regret that we left the EU and mounting disapproval. But the problem is, it doesn't matter if 50 or 60% think Brexit was a bad idea. It matters what the voters in certain constituencies, in swing seats and former Labour seats think about. That's a key problem. We don't have a PR system. That's an issue. This is not the time for Labour to talk about making Brexit work. It's time to expose its failure and to offer a radical alternative, a closer working relationship with the EU. And I think if Starmer talked about how he could alleviate queues at Dover, make Brexit work in that context, work closer with the EU to really fix some of the issues as much as we can do as a third country, I think if he did that, he'd be on to more of a winner here. But he doesn't really do that much. I mean, he talks about deregulation with financial services. I mean, Jesus, man. This is not to argue that the outcome of the 2016 referendum cannot be ignored. Democracy demands it to be respected, and it has done. We have left the EU. We've left the EU in its entirety. The thing with the referendum said, do you want to leave the EU? I think that was the question, right? Do you vote to leave the EU now? That's not about the single market or the customs union. Maybe we could have stayed in. Depends how you define what the EU is. Norway isn't part of the EU. It's part of EFTA. It's part of the single market, but it's not part of the EU. So maybe we could have done that, especially when you had Nigel Farage saying we could be like Norway, and then he took it back straight away. No doubt Johnson will lie about Labour's true intentions as he lied about getting Brexit done, which is true, and that's, I think, the thing Starmer feared a lot, that the Brexiteers will spin this on him. That they would say, oh, he's trying to take us back into the EU. Siren voices in Brussels will argue against doing a bespoke deal with a nation that turned its back on full membership. And I was thinking, Siren, is he talking about, the people who would lead sailors astray? In Greek mythology, human-like beings with alluring voices. I mean, to argue these people are sirens is ridiculous. That's what I mean. It was written by a very English-centric idea that, the people who would be telling, who'd be stopping the EU from giving us any kind of bespoke deal are bad, villains, people trying to lead the EU astray. Ridiculous statement. Genuinely, if I was in the EU, right, and, I saw the UK trying to rejoin aspects of the EU, right, I'd be like, look, we'll give you guys, 5 to 10 years, sort yourselves out, get a better electoral system, really think about why do you want to rejoin the EU or parts of the EU. Really think about it, because it's got to go far beyond economics and politics. It's got to go to a massive cultural change where we see freedom of movement as not a bad thing, or not a thing as we're the proper Europeans, but see it as, a thing where we integrate ourselves with Europe in a sense of, we have freedom of movement because not only do we want people to come here to work, but also to live and enjoy their lives. The same as, the EU sees freedom of movement for us, people to enjoy their lives in Spain or France, as people could have done when we had freedom of movement. You could retire. Yes, you have to apply for residency and other things, but you can choose to live your life in another country if you so wish. And it wasn't an issue before, but now it is, because we saw, people from the EU coming here, taking our jobs, filling up our NHS and all of this mere nonsense. You're the reason that my kid can't get a school place. You're the reason I can't buy a house. You're the reason why I can't see a doctor. You're the reason why I can't get a job. It needs a massive cultural change. And the problem is the Tories created a massive mess and blamed it on foreigners. The classic conservative move, and it always works. It talks about Switzerland has rights with the single market that come very close to making it a full member. Virtually it is. Not a full member of the EU, but a full member of the single market. But Switzerland is special because of its size, not special because of its size, because of its banks, and because of its historical neutrality. Switzerland has a special agreement because I think the EU wanted EFTA countries to have some sort of agreement with the EU when it came into the single market. Now, the Swiss people rejected it initially, and they got it through via a series of bilateral agreements, which is a nightmare for the EU, which they don't want to replicate with any other country. He goes, Britain would have to give something in exchange, and the first concession would have to be an agreement to a measure of European immigration in the EU. Why is that a concession? Why is having freedom of movement or having, giving easier access for EU migrants or EU workers to come to the UK, why is that a concession? This is what I mean by the English-centric nature of this vision. Why is it concession when we need more people to come to the UK to work? Like I said, record high vacancies, record low unemployment. Having freedom of movement is not a concession. Freedom of movement is inherently a good thing, in my opinion at least. Other people can dispute it. There are problems with freedom of movement with human trafficking and exploitation. There are more things governments need to do to stop that sort of stuff. But inherently, in my opinion, I think freedom of movement is a good thing. It allows people, to go and see other parts of the world, without the need for visas and passport issues, etc. But also it allows more kind of cultural integration, a bigger melting pot. People from, around Europe that can live in the UK. I think having easier visa requirements for people around the world is a good thing, because it gets rid of certain prejudices. I think, you can end up with dodgy neighbours from anywhere in Europe. It happens, but you can also end up with dodgy, neighbours from England. I think more cultural integration, I think, is a good thing, in my opinion, anyways. Hackles rise at the mere mention of the subject, but unless we accept some immigration as part of the bargain, we will never sign a new free trade agreement. That's not true. We've signed a free trade agreement with the EU without the need for more immigration. We've got the 1980 rule for for non-visa requirements, etc. For travel. I think it's ridiculous to argue we can't get another free trade agreement without immigration being a part of it. But we won't rejoin the single market without freedom of movement, which is a pillar of the single market. That's one of the things that cause issues in Switzerland, because I think some people in Switzerland are against freedom of movement, but it's a package deal. You don't get free movement of goods and services without freedom of movement of goods. I mean, people even. I'm losing my train of thought here, but you get what I'm saying, right? The idea that freedom of movement or accepting more European immigration is a concession is a very English-centric, and in my opinion, a xenophobic view, a very xenophobic view. He says the party's annual conference is just a couple of months away. Good Europeans should, in a fashionable phrase, make the most of it. I don't know what he means by good Europeans. I think that's a joke. But this is Roy Hattersley is a former deputy leader of the Labour Party. I mean, this is a guy who had power in the Labour Party. He's written an op-ed which is very, in my opinion, very English-centric and doesn't kind of respect freedom of movement, doesn't respect EU consumers or EU workers. He treats them more as a commodity rather than human beings, which, in my opinion, is wrong. Again, it's my opinion. I could be wrong on that, but freedom of movement, in my opinion, is inherently a good thing. But these people just fail to acknowledge that. But anyways, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Support the channel on Patreon if you can. And hopefully I'll see you in the next one.